Hello and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. My name is Dan Allen. I am joined by Ellen Thomas. How's it going, Ellen?
Hey, Dan. I'm doing great.
That is good news. That is very good news. And who do we have joining us today, Ellen?
Joining us today, we have Yemi Bamiro, who is a documentary filmmaker. We haven't had one of those on for a while. And his most recent feature documentary called Black is Beautiful, the Kwame Brathwaite Story, screened at London Film Festival this year and was in the official competition. A lot of his work focuses on social and cultural movements, especially to do with music and sport. His debut documentary was about the Nike Air shoes and Michael Jordan. It was called One Man and His Shoes. He's also created a film called Super Eagles 96. He's directed a TV series that broadcasted on BBC called Fight the Power, How Hip Hop Changed the World. So yeah, a lot of really exciting projects that we can't wait to talk to him about.
Absolutely. So without any further ado, welcome to the podcast, Yemi. How's it going?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Exactly. We're very excited to have you. And you're fresh off the back, I think your film was at London Film Festival this year as well?
Yeah. We've just sort of, someone said like, I've still got that festival glow, which made me laugh. Like, it was an amazing sort of like week, basically. Yeah, we had 2 screenings at London Film Festival. Our film was in competition as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the first time that's happened. But it was amazing because, a lot of the production team is here in London. So it was a bit of a homecoming for the film.
Amazing.
So yeah, we had a great time.
Yeah.
Can you co-wrote and directed the project. It's called Black is Beautiful, the Kwame Brathwaite Story.
Yeah, it was, the origins of the project sort of like spanned back to about 2.5 years ago when one of the producers on the film just randomly sort of like messaged me, and she said that there's this project she wants to talk to me about. She said it's about this sort of like Harlem-based photographer called Kwame. Mm-hmm. And I kind of like had the book, so I kind of like knew a little bit about his work.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know just like how much work he had sort of left behind. Mm-hmm. Like things kind of like progressed pretty quickly. We kind of like went into development on the project not long after that email, and that involved going to California and meeting Kwame's family, who are sort of like the face of the archive. And, they have been working for a long time to kind of like keep Kwame's name just alive, basically, and his work still tours and it's in exhibitions, and so it was an amazing sort of like unearthed story, and we sort of started making it maybe 6 months after that initial email. So it's been an amazing journey for the film and for everybody involved.
Yeah. What's that process like in terms of, obviously you've got that idea, are you sort of at that stage where you don't ask for permission, you just go, you start shooting, start meeting those people? Or do you have to then take a step back and look for commissioners and people that might invest in the film? What's that process from that email to filming?
Yeah, so I think with this film was independently financed. So, luckily we had financing in place. But I guess after that, once you've made the film, you've got to take it out into the marketplace and sell it, which is why festivals are really important for a film like ours, because it kind of puts you in the shop window. But yeah, to go back to your original question, it's a process, right? So I got the email from the producer, Lizzie Gillett, and I think after that, like, we go into sort of like development for a couple of months where we're kind of like working out what the project is. So that development looks like me writing quite an extensive treatment for the film, and then almost like putting together a proof of concept, almost like a little trailer for the film.
Nice.
And then also going to see the archive in California. That was the three things that development involved. So sort of like the trailer, the treatment, and then sort of going to visit the family in California. And so that once all of those things sort of like came together, we know sort of, you know, the direction of the film. So we know that there's this amount of archive. We know that this is basically how we can make the film, and this is how much it's going to cost. And then it's just about a schedule basically, and that schedule has to align to how much money you have, because it's dependent on sort of, you know, that fitting, and that's pretty much how it worked. So I think we started production on the film in maybe sort of like the beginning of 2024.
Okay.
And we finished the film. What are we now? We're just about to go into November. We finished the film summer, like maybe August this year. Like, wow. I kind of feel like we were working on it, you know, like pretty much up to the LFF deadline. But so that was pretty much the process. Like, so it's basically 2 years of work, basically.
And did you have London Film Festival in that deadline in mind from its conception, or
not really?
Yeah.
No, because we didn't know when we were going to finish the film.
Yeah.
So it was almost like, okay, well, you know, when we sort of like knew, okay, we're going to finish around here, like what festivals can we apply to? That's sort of like how that worked. So, we just kind of like, you know, you submit to loads of festivals and you see, you know, what the response is. So thankfully, like, London came back. We're going to New York next 2 weeks.
Amazing.
For a Doc NYC, which is going to be another homecoming for the film, because all of the family are from New York, and he was from New York. So it's kind of like festivals for this film are quite important, because like I said, it's independently financed, and it's word of mouth, and sort of, you know, you need to sort of like have your film in the shop window, so to speak.
You going back to talking about the treatment, what does that look like? Because I understand in scripted or fiction, a treatment, sort of an outline of the film and like a taster of it. But I imagine with documentary filmmaking, it's a lot more sort of volatile, and like the idea can develop quite a lot later down, like the process in producing and even when you're filming. So what do you sort of include in that treatment?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's funny because a friend of mine came to see the film at LFF, and he mainly works in fiction as well, and he asked me about the treatment, and I sent it to him. And but before I sent it to him, I had a look at it, because I hadn't looked at it for 2 years. And it was quite a long treatment, so it's like maybe 40 pages long. Yeah. But because it was, you know, Kwame's work is very visual, there's lots of pictures in there. And it is basically an outline of the film. It's basically how I think we should make this film, like from, you know, who I think should be in the film. So like there's a kind of like a really rough like contributor list, and then there's sort of like a beats list, you know, like what the story beats are going to be, and then it's basically like an outline for how I see the film, but then there's all sort of, you know, like we were going to shoot lots of recon, we didn't end up shooting as much, but like when we first started to think about the film, there was like, you know, that was quite a key part of the film, so there was kind of like a lot of explanation as to how we were going to do that. So it's basically like a massive overview, but because like I said, he's so visual, and like a lot of the archive has never been seen before, that was kind of like at the heart of the treatment as well. Like, you know, there's all of this incredible material that's never been seen before, and we need to lean into that. So
it sounds like a lot of the discovery process then is happening in advance of the filming or the collection of this material. Whereas I always thought that documentaries, a lot of the time, the discovery process happens almost in the edit. Would you say that that's sort of not your process? Your process is much more, you are building a thing that you kind of can pre-visualize quite strongly, or does it just differ from project to project?
I think it differs from project to project. I think we had a strong sense of what the film was from the beginning. But there was an element of surprise in the edit, because, you know, we were drawing from this living, breathing archive. So we worked very closely with the family, and they would provide us with everything that we needed from his archive. But that when I say it's a living, breathing archive, they haven't, he took over 500,000 pictures in his lifetime. So in terms of them, they don't know, every single picture, image, negative that is in the archive. So it's a sort of like it's a discovery for them as well. They've maybe been through like 10-15% of his archive. So there were certain moments in the archive, in the edit, where just stuff came in and we were like, oh my God, like we didn't anticipate that, or that really helps us, or we can use that to kind of like, illustrate this point. It didn't really change the kind of like the general structure of the film, but there was an element of kind of like feeling our way through the edit, and because it was such a I don't want to say knotty, but like Kwame lived many lives, he sort of like passed when he was 85 years old, and the thing about his life is that he never stuck to one thing. Yes, he was a photographer, but his kind of like photographic pursuits like took different guises. He was sort of like the house photographer at the Apollo Theatre in Harlem, and then he sort of like did album covers, and then he sort of like had a real infatuation with Africa and went to Africa to sort of like take pictures and to sort of like join the kind of like political like movement in terms of like helping these countries free themselves from sort of like bondage and colonization and stuff like that. So I think the editor and sort of like co-writer Otto Burnham always said in the edit, like, there's so much story, like, and that was the challenge of this film. It's like we could have made a 4-part series about Kwame, but ultimately we were making sort of like a 95-minute film, and we couldn't put everything in there. So it always came, what is the most compelling part of the story, and how does it speak to his sort of like legacy and his sort of who he was as a man. And then also the other side of the story is the fact that in real time his family are kind of like discovering who he was and sort of like going through the archive, and that's part of the story as well. So you've sort of like got this historical backstory about him, and then you've got this contemporary story about this family trying to keep their father's kind of like legacy alive.
Did you ever imagine what it would look like if it was a TV series, and what sort of directed that decision that it was going to be a feature?
Yeah, I think I only thought about it as a TV series or something longer when we were in the edit, because we had so much material. But I think the project came as a feature film. So we were always like, from the beginning, this is a feature film. But I guess in the edit, we it wasn't necessarily something I even shared. I just kind of like thought that, wow, like you could make, an episodic sort of like series, because like there's just so much stuff. You could have a chapter on his kind of like exploits and pursuit of Africa. You could have sort of like a chapter or an episode about Harlem. You could have an episode about the Grandassa models. There was just so much stuff. It's something that I thought about in the edit at some point.
Yeah.
Did you ever have to like just go, okay, rather than just make this a section of the film, this is just going to be a brief montage and we'll just squish this down? Or do you just occlude stuff because you can't do certain sections justice? Like,
yeah, I think, Lawimbo, who was our associate editor, and Otto, who's the editor and co-writer, I think, we would have to, like, if you came into the edit, like, you just see it plastered with, like, Post-it notes. Like, we really scrutinized the story, and I think Lawimbo and Otto were at the heart of that. Like, we would always like stress test it, and like we would have these sessions about just how the beats talk to one another. I found those sessions like really difficult, like, because it would blow my mind, because there was just so much stuff, and like just streamlining it and sort of like making it compelling and making each scene talk to the next scene. Yeah, like I found that really intense, but like Otto and Lawimbo were just like incredible at it. They'd worked together before and they were just so good at story and sort of like, you know, what do we need? What don't we need? How does this make us feel? And yeah, they really elevated the film with their kind of like partnership and their kind of like attention to detail when it came to kind of like, you know, how can we find the most compelling story?
It really sounds like you had such a wealth of resources and material to work with. Have you ever sort of worked on a project where there's been elements missing or not having access to parts of the story that you really wanted or felt you needed, and how have you sort of adapted to that?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure. Like I think a little bit to I made the first feature film I made was called One Man in His Shoes, and it was about the phenomenon of Air Jordan sneakers. And we made that film over 7 years.
Wow.
And yeah, like it was a real sort of like labour of love, passion project. We didn't have any money, like myself and the producer and the editor, we sort of like or put all of our money into that film to make it, and we always knew it was going to be a long process. And I think, you know, your question was about did we ever, you know, where, you know, have I ever worked on a project where there were sort of like gaps or things that we didn't need? And I think the reason why I think of that project is because I think that if someone had sort of like given me like a bag of money and said like make this film in like a year or 2 years, then we wouldn't have been able to sort of like benefit from the time that it took to make the film. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And therefore we would have needed, you know, lots of other stuff, like, but because it was such a long, it was made over such a long period of time, like everything fell into place. So like, yeah, we didn't, you know, access, like one contributor took me 2 years to sort of like get him in the film.
Wow.
But, and if we had started and sort of, if we had a deadline, then we wouldn't have been able to get him, you know, like it was just, we just kept I'd like sort of like email him every 6 months, 7 months, just to see if he'd had a change of heart. And I think, you know, I think in the end he was just like annoyed of this like random guy from South London
being pestered.
And then so he kind of like, you know, was open to it. But there were instances like that where, you know, if we just made it in a 2 year period, there's so many people that we wouldn't have got in the film. And we always wanted we wanted that film to be really comprehensive. Like we wanted all of the main people that were part of that story to be in the film. I was always like of the opinion that I never want anybody to be able to make this film again, like selfishly, because I was just like, you know, because I think there was like this film, like Alex Gibney made this film, the documentarian about Scientology, and I remember watching it. I think it's called The Prism of Belief, and it was about Scientology, and it was like the most like sort of like definitive, like comprehensive, like compelling film that I'd ever seen on sort of like that subject. And he sort of like got all of these amazing storytellers to say, and that was just always a reference in my head. It was just like, you don't need to make another Scientology film again, because it's just like he's really nailed it.
He's done it.
So yeah, I guess, yeah, a long-winded sort of like way of answering your question is that like, yeah, I just think about that film when I think about, you know, this idea of like grappling with access or things that you haven't necessarily been able to sort of, you know, penetrate there and then, but like just given a bit of time, you're able to kind of like pick that lock basically.
And maybe balancing like having patience with that process and then deciding when, okay, we're going to do this project without that kind of thing. Yeah,
100%. Yeah,
I love that. The with something like that, obviously you had a lot of time spent working on that film. Was that because that was independently made? Like, did you have? I'm sort of really interested in that sort of relationship between the filmmakers and also commissioners, or and also certainly like the platforms, because I know you've obviously, you know, Camden's on Disney Plus, obviously you've got Trainwreck, which is on Netflix. Were they involved in the creation of those, or do your films always start off independent and then find homes in these places? Obviously I know Camden's a series, so I imagine that's a little bit of a different process, but yeah, how does that work with them and sort of where they end up, and does that affect what you can and can't say in those films, you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. So basically, One Man in His Shoes was the first like long form feature film that I ever made. So that was like my sort of like my first feature film. And when I started making that film, I knew that it was going to take a long time to make. So originally, when I started making it, I gave myself like a 3-year plan of like how I would make it. So like the first year would be about sort of like, you know, proof of concept. Like I would make a teaser, a trailer, and sort of like start to make some sort of like headway with access. And then sort of like year 2 would be about me like shopping that around and then trying to find financing for it. And then year 3 would be like making it. And then maybe it was 4 years, and then year 4 would be like us releasing it out into the world, right?
Yeah.
So I was always at peace with the fact that, like, you know, like we've just got to be patient with this.
Yeah.
And I think like once we sort of like made the proof of concept, like I think we just like tried to speak to everybody, and everybody just basically said no. And I think that just kind of like made us more determined to sort of like go and make it ourselves. And which is what we did, right? So that was an independent film, but I always knew that I wanted to make features or like long form stuff. But I knew that like without having sort of like anything to show people, then like no one was gonna sort of like give me a chance to make a feature. Yeah. So I guess One Man in His Shoes was sort of like the calling card, right? It was like the film that I could sort of like show to people and sort of like say like I can make a film about over 90 minutes that is, you know, that kind of like works as a story. So when you speak about all of those other projects, they kind of like, I was able to do all of those other things because I made One Man in His Shoes. That's the way I think about it. And I think that, you know, I kind of like, I jump around. Like sometimes I do like features, and then sometimes like I might do episodic stuff, and then sometimes I might develop my own stuff. But it's all about timing. It's about producers sort of like calling you up and sort of like offering you projects or asking you if you're interested in projects. So like the Netflix thing and sort of like the Camden thing, they're all like based on me knowing producers that were involved in those projects, and they sort of like asked me if I was interested. But the reason why they even know my work, it all comes back to One Man in His Shoes, like, you know, because that film came out in COVID when no one had nothing to do. So in one way, it's like the worst time a film could come out, because it was just like everyone was at home, and like theatrical sort of like cinema sort of release was like cut short, but also sort of like everybody was just at home, so like everyone was just consuming stuff, right? And so yeah, like I think it always comes back to that first film, because, you know, it was a sweet spot between sort of like music and culture and sort of like, you know, socio-political sort of like landscape. It spoke about America. A lot of my work has a focus in America. So yeah, I think I think I'm able to work in this way. I always credit that film, and I kind of like knew it would work out like that, you know. I kind of like had a feeling that like we just have to sort of like, you know, we have to be patient and make this film, and then it will kind of like, you know, it will benefit us in the long run, and that's what that film sort of did.
Yeah, you hear that all the time. I think. I was just going to say, like, with people's like first films, where just everyone says no, no, no. I think Saw got rejected by everyone. I mean, this is in fiction. I think White Lotus got rejected by everyone, and you know, Mike was like an established guy.
Exactly.
But yeah, you just got to like believe in it to sort of open that world in a way. Sorry, Ellen.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Do you think that film, it captures sort of the topics and the themes that you're really interested in, and so that's like the work that you've made out after that has always sort of been related to that in that way?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think that film is like, I guess it was like the freest experience that I've ever had making a film, because like we didn't really like know what we were doing. Like from like we knew the story we were telling and we had access to all of these people, but that was just like emailing and sort of like, you know, we didn't have like a commissioner or network breathing down our necks. It was just kind of like we were just making it. And the people that I made it with, like Will Thorne and Michael Marden, like they're my friends. Do you know what I mean? And so we just like made it together, and it was really tough and it was hard, but it was also like it was making sort of like a project with your mates. And I think that it like, so in terms of like autonomy, like I think people that make films talk about autonomy a lot and ownership. Like, you know, we own that film. We, you know, like because of the way that we made it, we sort of like own that film now. So it was just it was a huge risk, you know, because like we put all of our life savings into that film.
Do you feel like that with Black is Beautiful?
Yeah, so Black is Beautiful was not like it's independent, but it's not like I didn't originate the idea. Do you know what I mean? I guess I was just tasked with me, Joanna, the producer, and Otto. Like we were just tasked with being custodians of like Kwame's legacy, you know, which is what we took really seriously. But it wasn't the same as sort of like One Man in His Shoes, where it was just kind of like this deep passion project. In many ways, Black is Beautiful, we were kind of like commissioned to sort of like do that. Like not necessarily director for hire, but like, you know, it's similar to that way, but like because we had such a close affinity to the subject matter and we felt so deeply sort of like connected to Kwame, it didn't feel like that, you know. It's, you know, we know the family really well, like we know Kwame's wife. It's like one of those kind of like projects that you're lucky to do in your lifetime where just everything works out and it's just an amazing sort of experience. So it's very different to One Man in His Shoes, which was kind of like just a lot of like blood, sweat and tears, like, and not knowing if that film was ever going to come out. We always knew Black is Beautiful was going to come out. Like it was, you know, Misfits are an amazing production company. Like, you know, they made the Superman Christopher Reeves film that's like won every award going, like, you know, so we always knew we were in safe hands with like reputable companies. So it was a bit different.
I wondered with the obviously the other ones, do they ever give you hard lines like you can't say this or you can't go there, like, or are you sort of free within the parameters to sort of do what you do and bring what you do to these projects? You know? I think it differs from project to project. Like with something like Camden, that felt sort of quite personal as well, because I started working at MTV. That was like my first TV job. Oh, nice.
So in Camden. So like a lot of that episode is with kind of like characters from that era when I was like sort of like in my early 20s working in Camden. And so I kind of feel like I had license to kind of just, you know, reflect my experience of that time in the film with the people that we were lucky enough to get in the film, whether that be Jazzy Beale, Giles Peterson, or like the Black Eyed Peas or Norman Jay. You know, that was all sort of like part of, you know, the early, like, what was it? It was kind of like, I mean, their legacies date back to kind of like the 80s and the 90s or whatever, but I remember like it kind of like reached a peak in Camden around that time in sort of like the early 2000s. So, and I was sort of like in my early 20s working at MTV, and like, you know, like live music was still a thing in Camden, and there were still lots of venues. So it just was almost like I was just kind of like, I was kind of like just reflecting my experiences, and sort of like trying to extract that from the people that we were talking to. So I kind of felt like I had a little bit of freedom on that. Something like Astro World Trainwreck is different, because that was like a real life story. Obviously Camden's a real life story, but it was, you know, it was quite a tragic story, and sort of, you know, the way in which you navigate something like that, you've got to be careful, because, you know, there are lots of different things at play. And ultimately, I think that film was just about centering the people who, experienced that horrific sort of like concert in Houston in 2021. And yeah, I'm trying to think of Super Eagles, which was the film that I made about the Nigerian men's football team that won Olympic gold in 1996. Again, that, as a British-born Nigerian, I had sort of like a connection to that story, and again had a little bit more license to kind of like just kind of almost, that affinity that I had for that team as sort of like an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old growing up in South London. You take everything you felt and you put it into the film, so there's like a giddiness and an enthusiasm, and sort of like that's what's driving it, and a curiosity as well, because I made that film like maybe when I was in my late 30s, or so again, but you're still approaching it like a little bit of a kid and a fan. Do you know what I mean? So every film is different, but I guess I can't really make a film if I don't have a connection to the story and the sort of like the subject matter. I think you've got to be curious, and you've sort of like got to have a little bit of like something that fuels you to make it. Otherwise it just feels like a job, right? Sort of, and you don't ever want to sort of like be making films and it just feels like a job. You always want it to sort of like be, exciting, and sort of like you need to be curious, and sort of like something needs to be driving, your kind of like enthusiasm for whatever it is you're making. So
yeah, I imagine with something like Astroworld, I mean, that must have been tough to work on with the kinds of interviews you were getting. I mean, I can't imagine it felt like a job, but I know you were saying about the responsibility, but just, I don't know, some of the stories that you were probably hearing again and again from the different people that were there. How hard was that to do compared to some of your other films?
Yeah, that was a really hard film to make. I think because basically it was just a lot of very traumatized people, the young people that went to that concert were, I don't know, 18, 19 at the time, and sort of like we made the film a few years after the sort of like the tragedy. So, and that sort of like trauma hasn't gone away. It's still with them, like seeing your friends be crushed to death, or seeing people really compromised and hurt and it was totally avoidable, this situation. So it was really difficult to make. I guess I felt one step removed though, right? I'm not American. I wasn't there that night. So I guess it was difficult to navigate, how hard it was for those young people. But I also felt like, there was a separation between sort of like me and them, and sort of if I sort of like lived in Houston and sort of like, I maybe I went to the concert, or I knew people that went to the concert, then that would have been a little bit different. But because I was almost like an outsider looking in on this situation, I kind of felt that I had the separation that was required to kind of like look at it really objectively. Whereas some of the other things that I've worked on, it's not that, it's something different. So, but yeah, it was really hard. It was, like I said, it was like young people that were forced to grow up really quickly through no fault of their own. And I think that was sort of hard to watch and sort of like make sense of,
Do you think about that a lot, sort of that balance between objectivity versus subjectivity in your films? Are you trying to be as objective as possible most of the time, or are you trying to find your voice and your version of things through it? Obviously, separate from Astroworld, where you mentioned that was more objective.
Yeah, I think I think it always depends on the project, but I think there has to be an element of, what are my thoughts and feelings on this subject matter that I'm sort of like about to spend a year of my life on, and can I sort of like contribute to this in a meaningful way, as somebody that is going to be tasked with telling this story. So that's the first thing that I always kind of like think about. And then I guess the objectivity, I mean, it's balance. It's always about sort of like, well, what are the facts, right? And sort of like how, you know, I never sort of, you don't want to mislead people. You don't want to tell people how to feel. You just want to sort of like put it all on the table and give people sort of like the opportunity to make up their own minds. I think there's this, I don't know, sometimes, you know, people just think that the audience is a dumb or something, like they can't make sense of what they're doing or seeing. And I never, you can't take the audience for granted. You just kind of like, you don't need to sort of like string them along or sort of like, you know, hold their hand through every sort of like scene. You can sort of like, you know, you can sort of like trust them to sort of like make up their own mind and make sense of whatever it is you're feeling. So I'm a big sort of like fan and advocate of that sort of filmmaking. Like I think it's sometimes like a lot of true crime documentaries, it's like very kind of like, you know, I'm going to just remind you every sort of like 10 minutes of where we are in the story. And I'm just like, I don't do you know what I mean? That's just like, I know, I'm watching it. Like, do you know what I mean?
And we're like, not this bit again. I've seen that 3 times.
Exactly, right?
That was a big thing with like the commercial break sort of documentary things, right? Where like every 10 minutes you'd have to remind everyone what went on for the previous 20 minutes. Every time there was an advert, which was every 10 minutes. And it was like, just stop it. And then you realise there's like, you're only getting 5 minutes of content every 20 minutes. And it was just like painful. Whereas like I feel like nowadays, thanks to like your Netflixes and your Amazons and Disney Pluses, like you don't have to do that as much, right? Like you don't. Well, I'm sure some still do. Some milk it, I think. You know. I think it's also to do with like, oh well, I've heard this. It's like to do with like people's attention spans and the way that phones have sort of like rewired our brains, and like, you know, they sort of like assume that like someone will be like scrolling on their phone while watching the documentary to sort of like remind them. And it's just like, come on, man. It's just like maybe that is a thing with some people, but like you can't just assume that it's like
to that,
everyone, you just assume that someone's gonna only half be paying attention, so you've got to kind of like dumb down whatever it is you're doing to make sure that they know where they are if, like when they stop looking at TikTok or something. It's just kind of crazy.
I was thinking about like components that make up a documentary and like the on-camera interviews that you do, and that's something that I've always wanted sort of to have demystified for myself. Like, how do you approach them and how do they actually work? Like, who asks the questions? Like, how many interviews do you do? Are there multiple takes? Like, how spontaneous are they? Sort of, Yeah.
Okay, so what you will do, like, so me, the director, I'll always do the interviews. I'll always write the questions. Like, you'll normally work with an assistant producer or producer that might have sort of like had a pre-interview chat with the contributor before. And then, they like, how I like to work is that, I might have one, it depends on the project, right? There are some projects where like, I don't meet the contributor until like when we shoot. And I generally like that because it's sort of like that element of spontaneity and surprise. And it sort of like feels a little bit off the cuff. Like sometimes if you've had like 5, like, pre-interview chats and then sort of like you get to the shoot, you kind of like know what this whole exchange is going to be like. So it kind of like ruins it a little bit. Not ruins it, but kind of like it takes that element of spontaneity and surprise away. Yeah. And it feels like very sort of like rooted in sort of like what you've done before as opposed to sort of like what you're going to do right now in the moment. But again, it depends on the project. For Astroworld, like we had to have those pre-interview chats with people because of the sensitivities of like what they would be talking about, and it was a lot of the job of like sort of like making documentaries with contributors is about rapport and about sort of like trust, right? So you can't necessarily just turn up on the day and expect to have that. So it depends on the project. Like something like Super Eagles, like I didn't meet any of the football players, because it's like they're based all over the world, they're pundits, they've run businesses. So there was an element of like just doing it on the day. Like I think my producer did have some conversations with some of the players, but we didn't meet all of them. Like the bigger ones, we didn't get a chance to meet them. So yeah, like there might be an element of like pre-interviews, and then sort of like you turn up on the day, and then sort of like I'll do the interviews. It depends on what the subject is, the subject matter is, but those interviews can last from anything from 2 hours to like 4 hours. Like I'm not a sort of like a person that likes to do really long interviews, because I think there's a limit to people and sort of like how good they become after like the 2.5 hour mark, you know. You will factor breaks into that, but generally speaking, I don't think I've ever gone beyond 4 hours. But there are some documentary directors that do like 7-hour interviews. Do you know what I mean? Like, so there's that. I can't remember what else. That's like the interviews. What else did you ask me about? Sorry.
No, it was about them and like how spontaneous they are, and you definitely covered all of that there. Okay, cool.
No
must be tough with documentary. You know, how often do you go, can you say it again, please? Because like that feels
so like I never do. So like again, I never. So the way that I write my questions are sort of like the way that we're talking. Yeah. Like, so when I interview people, I want it to be conversational.
Sure.
You know, and if there's things that I need them to get, or need them to say, or need them to clarify, I'll pick those things up in the end. Up at the end of the interview. Like, I don't necessarily want to interrupt the exchange and the flow and the rapport that I have with a person by like stopping them and telling them to sort of like, you know, because they might be free flowing in their thoughts and sort of like the way that they express themselves. And then if you just sort of like stop them abruptly and say, oh, well, can you say that line again? Or like, can you do that
more
again?
dramatically?
It's just like, it just, do you know what I mean? It just kind of like ruins it. So, but yeah, like I normally sort of like get those things at the end, and it's never about getting people to say things again. It's more about clarity, you know? So like, for instance, I'm working on a project at the moment, and we were shooting with a fireman, and you know, he was using a lot of kind of like jargon that only firemen would know. Do you know what I mean? Like perhaps if you're at home watching it, you won't know what he's talking about. So in that instance, like I just at the end, we just kind of like just simplified some of the things that he was saying, and we kind of like, you know, got him to explain some of that jargon, so it just is a little bit more accessible.
Nice.
But generally speaking, it's kind of like, it's, you know, I try not to read off questions. I try to sort of like write stuff, and like the questions are like prompts, so I write the questions in the way that I talk. So like when I look at them, it's, you know, it's not like, well, what color was your hair that day? It's sort of like, it feels like a conversational question, you know? And then that just kind of like, that disarms people, and that makes people feel a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah. This feels a bit meta, like quizzing you about interviewing while trying to interview you.
I didn't think about it like that.
Could you actually do that answer again, please? But just be... Obviously, we know it's sort of tight for time, so I just thought we'd wrap up with the couple of questions that we ask all our guests, which is sort of what you were doing during your teenage years that sort of turn out to be very helpful and set you up for what you do now, whether directly or indirectly. And then also, what advice would you give to that teenage self if you could travel back in time?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So when I was a teenager, I was obsessed with music, and I was very sure that I was going to be a music journalist and write about music. And so what I would do is I would like write my own album reviews as a way to sort of like sharpen my, you know, just kind of like I'd write them as kind of like, because I was a fan of the album, but I'd like write these album reviews because I really enjoyed writing about like music, right? And I think that, you know, and they weren't like sort of like little sort of like paragraphs. They were like massive think pieces about like these albums, and like, you know, because I was a bit of a nerd when it came to music. Like I read all the sort of like the linear notes, and like I wanted to know who mixed the song or who produced it, and I'd sort of like, you know, do you know what I mean? So it was a proper deep dive. Like they weren't accessible music reviews. They were just kind of like me just kind of like writing about my favorite like albums in a way that, you know, I found enjoyable. But like, I think that level of detail and sort of research really served me for what I do like now. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, there is a lot of writing in my job now, and I don't find writing really easy, but like, it's something that I kind of don't mind doing. Like, it's just a necessary process in what we do, you know. But like, some directors I know that really hate writing, like really hate it, and I don't necessarily feel like that, but like, writing is work. Do you know what I mean? But like, once you find that rhythm and once you find that flow, like, I find it quite enjoyable. So I think that is something that has definitely served me like really well, you know, like, because, you know, when you're writing these really extensive treatments, I always think back to kind of like when I was 14 or 15, like writing the album covers, or writing the album reviews or whatever. So I guess that's one thing that's served me well. I think one piece of advice I would have given myself kind of perhaps revolves around like confidence, I think. I don't necessarily think I was a super confident like teenager. Like, I always knew what I wanted to do, but I think I always kind of like grappled with like whether it was the right thing to do. Do you know what I mean? And I was quite headstrong, but I was also like, I'm not sure about this. So I think I would sort of like just tell myself to be a little bit more confident and be a little bit more forthright in some of the decisions that I was making at the time. Like, but ultimately it was all about confidence. And I think towards the end of my teenage years, I got that confidence. I had blinkers on because I kind of like always knew that what I wanted to do. I was either going to sort of like be writing about music or like be doing something in music. And I think like making documentaries is not really too far away from that. So, but I think in my early teenage years, I think there was a lot of kind of like angst and sort of like lack of confidence. So I think I would tell myself, just to be more confident and everything is going to be okay.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Thank you so much. It's been a real treat hearing about your experiences and stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Documentary makers. You all right there?
My chair just almost absolutely collapsed.
As I was saying, documentary makers are just so cool. Like, everyone I meet who makes documentaries, I'm just, like, they've just got an extra level of cool, I think, to them that maybe just bog standard filmmakers are missing.
Hey, what are you trying to say? That feels. I disagree fundamentally. No, you know what? Actually, the documentary filmmakers that I've spoken with, they are kind of cool in like in like an approachable way. I think film,
and I think what it is that usually documentary makers have another interest that they are like an expert in, because filmmakers experts in film, documentary makers are experts in making documentaries, but they also have like this niche. And I think that's the coolest thing ever, when people are they've got something that they're obsessed with or just have this connection with and commitment to telling stories about that's really special and cool.
Yeah, and I guess as well, you know, it comes
but it's
with
not
that
competition.
Profession. No, it's not. No, because we'd win. No, I'm joking. I feel like it's they're dealing with quote unquote members of the public a lot more. Do you know what I mean? The way they're having to engage with interview questions and stuff. So I think there has to be an element of personability and relatability if you want to succeed in the documentary world. And don't get me wrong, I actually think that's necessary in the other things as well. I think you've got to get your ideas through people to get them off the ground. And you especially have to get your ideas, get it through people to get a fiction thing off the ground, because it can be so expensive. But you know, with every documentary you're making, you're speaking to more and more and more and more people. And I think that's just going to naturally attract or create someone that is competent and successful at speaking with people and stuff, you know?
Yeah, it's closely related to journalism and sort of that field a lot more, which is super interesting.
Yeah, I would agree. And then also, I always say there's a musicality to film, and I think that also applies to documentary, especially if you are doing a documentary feature film. You know, there's a certain rhythm and flow to it, and the way you're always going to incorporate soundtrack and stuff. So, I love sort of the musical comparison. That I think it means a lot to me, and also it means a lot to Yemi as well. It was exciting to sort of hear about his love of music as well. Yeah.
Dan, because you are a director too.
It has been said.
Can you? Do you think you could make a documentary?
No.
And what? Well, no.
Sorry, no. I could make one. I don't know what I'd want. It would have to be something I'm really passionate about telling that story. Most of the stories I'm really passionate about telling are made up. They didn't happen. Yeah. Although the truth is, I think successful stories actually sort of get at a real truth, you know? When you tell a story, it's generally like thematically rewarding, and the stories that really land with people generally are successful stories because they speak to something really true, you know? But that often is like an internal experience or an emotion. It could be something that is like a wider phenomenon or like a social issue, but often it's something more inward, I guess, whilst also being social. Whereas I guess, with documentary, I think there's different stories and different interests lend themselves to different kinds of stories. You know what I did think would be a very good like feature film, though, like a fiction but based on a true story, is obviously the Eagles documentary that he did. I thought that would make such a good film, because it reminded me of, obviously, like, you know, there's sports sort of underdog stories, and like, I mean, there's that film Eddie the Eagle, which also has eagle in its name, which is obviously the skier who competes in the Olympic with is it Taron Egerton? But I feel like that would make a fantastic feature film. So I think it depends what it is you want to tell stories about, you know. I was actually, funnily enough, my question for you was going to be, if you had to make a documentary, what would your documentary be on? But don't worry, we can edit this. So if you take 20 minutes, I'm gonna. What we're going to do, we're going to do a countdown for the audience, and in 3, 2, 1, boom, Ellen's going to tell us a documentary of choice.
Gosh, I want to give a good answer, but
no, I
think sometimes I do have little daydreams about what would make cool documentaries as well, and I understand
you might not want to give away your $1 million ideas.
Yeah, but I think I'm interested in documentaries or like series that have an overarching theme, but they go to different people or different sort of subsections of the story to kind of give a perspective on that sort of kind of main theme. So like having like people who like work in the north of England, for example, and like going to different sort of cool places and industries there, and like spotlighting different people's experiences. Not that that's kind of a sort of example idea, but kind of a documentary that goes into the nooks and crannies rather than sort of like one singular person's story. Yeah.
Okay. No, I like that. You should do it. Don't let the world tell you. Yeah,
I've just got to think of a subject. But I think it's hard to find, or like that's something we didn't talk about, I guess, because Yemi has such finding the subject of your documentary, because Yemi sort of grew up with a strong interest in music and sort of social sort of movements and phenomena. But I think mainly from what he was saying was like, you've got to make stuff that you're super interested in.
Yeah.
And that you can commit time to and spend a lot of time with that idea and story.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I think, yeah, you've got to have that passion for anything you work on, because ultimately all sort of movies end up taking years to get to make, overall from start to finish. You're talking potentially a year of preparation, especially in the documentary world. I mean, Yemi mentioned it was like 4 years or 7 years, I think he said it came to total, but it was a 4-year plan for One Man and His Shoes, his Michael Jordan documentary. But feature fiction, you could be spending 2 or 3 years trying to get the film off the ground, and then it's another 2 years of making that film before it comes out. So you better like it. And I always remember a filmmaker said, I once heard a filmmaker say, and this maybe applies more to fiction than documentaries because the crews are bigger in fiction, but someone once said that people are going to get divorced because they're working on your film. So it better be good. And I've always remembered that. And what that means, obviously, the films are tough. People go away for long periods of time to shoot stuff. So there very much might be ends of relationships because a person on your crew is away from their significant other for an extended period of time. Yeah. So the point stands. Your film better be good.
Yeah.
You better believe in it,
Thanks
at least.
Thanks for clarifying that reason.
You're welcome.
Do you have a question for us, Dan?
I do, actually. Yes. This is from. Who's it from? Tabby. So Tabby says, "Hi there. I'm working on a documentary. I've got loads of footage, and I can't decide if it should be a short or a feature. What do you think is best for me right now?" And Tabby is 17. So, what are your thoughts, Adam?
My thoughts go instantly to it should be a short film. Because if it is your one of your first documentaries that you're making, that it's good to sort of start building a portfolio and have kind of a piece there, and then you can sort of start on another project, but you already have something to show people. And another thing with making a short documentary is that, because Yemi was sort of talking about making sort of those, I can't remember what he called them, but do you remember, Dan?
Like the sort of trailer. He was doing like a test trailer to sort of treatment for the treatment,
And with a short documentary, you can sort of create the feature in short form and then return to it and make a feature, but you can sort of test the idea out, and you can also show people your idea with a lot less sort of time and investment. Yeah,
I agree. There was a cynical voice in my head that basically said, if you're asking the question, it should probably be a short. You know what I mean? If you're unsure about whether it should be a feature, maybe it shouldn't be a feature. And some films aren't features just purely based on subject matters, There are some documentaries that are just beautiful short forms. They're maybe about something so niche and so small that it's a really interesting 15-minute watch. But maybe the person it's about isn't... most documentaries that are about people are people that already have... their name already means something and has their sort of... I don't know, a celebrity in some way. They're famous or infamous for something. Whereas with shorts, you can often find that they're about really unique things that you would never have encountered before, and you certainly wouldn't have heard of that person. And that makes a really good 15-minute watch. But when you're then going and hearing sort of like every bit of backstory about, let's say it is about a person, your documentary, and you're going to spend 20, 30 minutes on their backstory, people might not care, whereas if it's someone that's famous for other reasons, then it doesn't matter how boring that backstory is. People are going to care because they're interested in that person because they love their work. Whereas with a short, I think You can sort of touch on the backstory. And don't get me wrong, if the backstory is really compelling, then great, yeah, delve into that. But yeah, if it is about a more niche, unknown subject matter, you won't be guaranteed to have the audience on your side. I mean, you're not guaranteed anyway, but you've got a pretty good chance of the audience sort of staying with what your content because they already like the person. So make it as tight as possible, make it as short as possible is what I would say, and tell the story as it should be told. And if it you get to the end and people are like, I need more of this, that, then maybe, you can start asking the question. Keep the footage, make the short first, finish the short, polish it to a really high standard, make sure the sound's good, work on making something that is cinema quality, but it's 15 minutes, for instance. And then if people are like, I need more of this, then maybe cut it into a feature, because it's going to be the amount of time commitment required for a feature just goes up massively, and you might be shortchanging yourself and robbing yourself of opportunities of getting other shorts, documentaries commissioned off the back of the success of your short film. Whereas you wouldn't have got that if you were busy, not wasting your time, but spending a lot of time working on this feature that maybe you've bitten off more than you can chew. The short, certainly if you're new to film, I think is going to give you more opportunities at first. And then, if it turns out it's great subject matter, then go and make that documentary, make that calling card, like what sort of Yemi did with his Michael Jordan documentary. But remember, that was about Michael Jordan, which helps.
Yeah, and I think later down the line, it might depend on the story, whether which form suits it best. And I think tools for working that out would be watching as many documentaries as possible, both short and feature, and thinking about why have those been made in that form, and what works well, what does it, and what do you want your film to be like in comparison to that sort of form-wise. Yeah,
100%. I think that's a great shout. Ellen, thank you for joining me. This has been lovely, as always.
This has been a very informative conversation.
Absolutely. So do send us your questions to podcast@youngfilmacademy.co.uk, and we will hope to answer them on a relevant future episode. So, thank you. And
Thanks
we'll
so
see
much.
you guys soon.
See you. Bye.